today's mindful moment, packed with insights but designed to fit into your busy life. One deep dive at a time. We're always being told more information is better.
Yeah.
Like, if we just had more data, we'd all understand things better and make, smarter choices.
Yeah.
But I don't know that. Like, if we really answered the big questions,
Yeah.
or have we just gotten, better at fooling ourselves?
That's a good question.
Okay.
I mean, think about some of the darkest moments in history.
Right.
Nazism, Stalinism.
Yeah.
Those were times of like massive information control, and yet they led to catastrophe.
So that's what we're really going to dive into today.
Right.
This whole idea of information versus truth.
Yeah, it's not a simple equation.
No, not at all. And we're going to use Yuval Noah Harari's book, NEXUS, as our guide to kind of explore these ideas, right? This interplay between information and truth and order and how that impacts us.
Yeah.
And I think for our listeners, people who really want to get to the heart of these complex ideas without spending hours and hours getting lost in the weeds, that's what this deep dive is all about.
Exactly. We're here to cut through the noise.
Exactly.
And really understand how information works.
Yeah. So let's start with like a really fundamental idea from Harari. He says, the main job of information isn't actually to reflect reality. It's more about making connections.
Yeah, think about it.
Okay.
Horoscopes, they connect people, right? Through these like astrological formations, propaganda that builds political movements. Anthems bring together entire nations.
Wow, yeah.
So information, it's more like putting things in formation.
So less like a mirror and more like an architect. Like it's actually building the structures around us.
Exactly.
I mean, even conspiracy theories, right? They might be based on totally wrong facts.
Right.
But they can bring people together really powerfully.
That's because errors and lies and even fantastical narratives, they're all information. And their impact, historically, comes from their ability to create these like shared realities, what Harari calls intersubjective reality.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Intersubjective realities. What does he even mean by that? And how did they start?
Okay, so think about it this way.
Okay.
Before we had shared stories, we had like objective reality, right? Rocks, trees, things like that. And then we had subjective reality, which is like our own personal feelings and experiences.
Right.
Pain, joy, stuff like that.
Okay.
But then stories came along and they added this whole third layer, intersubjective reality. These are things that only exist because huge numbers of people believe in them.
Like what kind of things?
Think of money or nations or corporations.
Yeah.
Their power comes from that collective belief.
Right.
Not from some inherent physical reality or even just one person's feeling.
So the story of a nation, it creates a shared identity, right?
Exactly.
It's for millions of people who will probably never even meet, but it allows them to cooperate on this massive scale.
Exactly. Stories were humanity's first crucial information technology.
Yeah.
It allowed cooperation to go way beyond just like face-to-face interactions. Chimpanzee societies, they're kind of limited, right?
Yeah.
By those personal bonds they have. Early humans probably had something similar.
Okay.
But storytelling, that allowed sapiens to connect in a whole new way.
Right.
Through these shared myths, shared beliefs that formed tribes of hundreds, even thousands.
Wow.
This ability to believe in shared fictions, it gave sapiens a huge advantage. It fostered this unprecedented level of cooperation that ultimately reshaped the world.
Yeah. It's easy to kind of dismiss those shared stories, right?
Yeah.
To think of them as just like, they're just myths or whatever.
Right.
But Harari's saying they're actually like the foundation of our societies.
Absolutely. And while some might say these stories just like disguise underlying interests, Harari argues that their power to create these intersubjective realities is often overlooked.
Yeah.
It's not just like a veil covering something else.
Right.
These stories actively shape our motivations and our world.
Okay, so stories were the first information tech.
Yeah.
What came next?
So the next big thing was written documents.
Oh, yeah.
See, stories are amazing at fostering broad cooperation through those shared narratives and emotions, but they're not so great at handling complexity and detail.
Okay.
Documents, they allowed for precise recording and retrieval of vast amounts of information.
Right.
Think of tax ledgers, legal contracts, all that bureaucratic stuff.
Right. So stories built the initial networks, and then documents provided like the operating system.
Precisely. Documents create a bureaucratic reality. When laws are written down, when contracts are signed,
Right.
the power of that paper, it's real.
Yeah.
It's not just describing reality.
Yeah.
It's actively constructing it.
So every new technology has downsides, though, right?
Of course.
What were the challenges of relying so much on documents?
Well, what's interesting is that bureaucracy, while it solves the problem of retrieval and enables these much larger networks, it often prioritizes order over nuanced truth.
Well,
In a way, kind of like mythology does, though through a different mechanism.
all right.
By imposing categories, it can actually distort understanding. We see echoes of this today, right?
Yeah.
With biased algorithms misclassifying data or rigid protocols that overlook individual needs.
Right, right.
This isn't just a digital age problem, though.
Oh.
It comes from bureaucracy's inherent tendency to favor order and categorization,
Yeah.
sometimes at the cost of accuracy.
Okay, so can you give me like a specific example of that?
Sure. Think of the biological concept of species. It's incredibly useful for organization, right?
Yeah.
But it can sometimes obscure the fluidity of evolution.
Right, right. It's like trying to fit everything into neat little boxes when the real world is much messier than that.
Yeah.
So there's this constant tension, it seems, within our information networks between this need for order and their pursuit of truth.
That's the ongoing dilemma that Harari highlights.
Right.
For any human information network to truly thrive, it has to do both, right?
Yeah.
Strive for accurate understanding, but also maintain social cohesion. And we've developed tools for both. Science for understanding, law, and government for order.
Okay.
But they can often clash.
Yeah, they definitely can. So this brings us to like the structure of these networks, right?
You're right.
Harari talks about democratic and dictatorial systems as being like distinct information networks.
Yeah.
How does their information flow and their self-correction, like how do those things differ?
Well, dictatorial information networks, they're very centralized.
Okay.
Information flows towards a central authority where most of the decisions are made. You can picture it like the Roman Empire, right? All roads leading to Rome. Totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia, they took this to the extreme. They wanted to control all information, all decisions. But even they were limited by the technology of their time.
Right.
You couldn't really have complete control back then.
Yeah.
Now, a centralized network could, in theory, have very strong self-correction.
Okay.
But the problem is, dictators often see independent power centers, like courts or the media, as threats.
Right.
So they suppress them. And that weakens the very mechanisms that could help identify and correct errors at the center.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So what about democracies then? How do they work as information networks?
Democracies are decentralized.
Okay.
Authority is distributed. You have all these checks and balances, right?
Right.
Robust self-correction mechanisms. And protecting individual rights from the will of the majority, that's key to this decentralization. It ensures freedom, but within limits.
Right.
And crucially, democracies acknowledge that everyone can be wrong, including leaders and even the majority.
Okay.
So they maintain these independent institutions, courts, a free press, scientific bodies, all to safeguard against errors, even popular ones. Elections, they mainly aggregate desires for order, not necessarily truth.
Okay.
So these other mechanisms are vital for protecting truth from, potentially misinformed public opinion.
So it's those independent checks and balances that really set democracies apart from dictatorships?
Exactly. Dictatorships often weaken those mechanisms to consolidate power.
Right.
Whereas democracies ideally value and protect them for long-term stability.
Right, right. And all this is happening as AI is like increasingly shaping our world. How does non-human intelligence, how does that change these information networks? For some really insightful analysis of how narratives and information impact us, you might want to check out Mindful Moments. It's an AI audiobook analysis YouTube channel. There's some really interesting approaches to these topics.
It's a profound shift. Before, all our information networks relied on human storytellers and bureaucrats.
Right.
AI, it brings in a totally new network member.
Right.
A non-human agent that can process information, pursue goals, and make decisions on its own.
Wow.
This is changing the very structure of our information network in ways we're just beginning to understand. You know, past technologies, they mainly augmented human capabilities. But AI, it can actually replace humans in decision-making.
Right.
Which could really change the trajectory of our species.
That's a pretty big leap, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, we're not just dealing with human biases anymore.
Right.
We're also dealing with the potential for non-human objectives within these systems.
Exactly. And one major concern here is algorithmic bias.
Okay, tell me more about that.
AI systems learn from data, right?
Yeah.
So if that data reflects existing societal biases, the AI can actually perpetuate and amplify them.
Oh, wow.
Algorithms can also impose order based on skewed data, leading to new forms of manipulation or reinforcing existing inequalities.
So can you give me an example of that?
Sure. Imagine a social media algorithm.
Go ahead.
It learns that outrage drives engagement.
Right.
So it might inadvertently incentivize users to post more and more extreme content.
Wow.
Even if that's not an accurate reflection of reality.
So the AI is like perceiving a distorted version of reality.
Yeah.
Based on its training data. And then it's shaping our interactions based on that distorted view.
Exactly. For AI to offer a more accurate and responsible perspective, its human creators have to understand that they're not just building tools.
Right.
They're actually unleashing independent agents that can shape our realities.
Yeah. Wow. So what are some of the broader societal implications of these increasingly complex AI-driven information networks?
Well, one big risk is growing distrust in institutions.
Yeah, I can see that.
When people don't understand how these systems work anymore, whether it's a complex financial algorithm or a social media recommendation engine, they become more susceptible to simple narratives and charismatic leaders who offer easy solutions in a confusing world.
Yeah.
This lack of understanding also makes people more vulnerable to conspiracy theories.
Right, because they're looking for answers.
Exactly.
It feels like we're at a real turning point here.
Yeah, I think so too.
What's the outlook for democracy in this age of sophisticated AI?
The future of democracy in the age of AI, it hinges on our ability to adapt proactively.
Okay.
This means actively seeking out and valuing diverse perspectives.
Right.
Even if algorithms are trying to steer us towards these echo chambers.
Yeah.
It also demands careful regulation of powerful algorithms and ensuring transparency in how they operate.
Reciprocity is crucial too.
What do you mean by that?
Well, as individuals face increased scrutiny, governments and corporations should too.
Right.
Ultimately, the goal is to make sure these technologies serve democratic values.
Right.
Not undermine them.
Okay, yeah. So beyond political structures, Harari also talks about this idea of pursuing ultimate goals.
Right.
How does AI factor into that philosophical challenge?
The pursuit of ultimate goals, whether by individuals or AI, it presents some really profound philosophical difficulties.
Yeah.
History shows us just how hard it is to define universally accepted values. Even seemingly straightforward ethical principles, they've been twisted and used to exclude certain groups.
Right.
So when we talk about programming AI with ultimate goals, we face the same fundamental questions, right?
Yeah.
Who gets to define those goals?
Right.
And how do we ensure that they stay aligned with long-term human well-being?
The tech world needs to learn from, the long history of philosophical attempts to define these ultimate goals.
Right.
And avoid the arrogance of thinking there are simple, rational solutions.
Right. So finally, Harari talks about global cooperation and the role of historical narratives.
Yeah.
How do those things relate to information networks today?
Well, global cooperation, it's challenging.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely vital for addressing those shared threats that we all face, like pandemics, climate change. It doesn't mean erasing cultural or political differences. But it does mean finding common interests. And a shared framework for action.
Yeah.
Historical narratives are also crucial in shaping our understanding of the world and defining national interests. Leaders often emphasize these narratives because they form the basis for collective identities and motivations. But it's really important to remember that these narratives are constructed. And they can be manipulated. self-correcting mechanisms, things that challenge those dominant narratives
Oh,
and
totally.
allow for critical reevaluation of the past, those are essential for long-term progress.
Yeah.
Even if they're politically inconvenient in the short term.
Right, right. So it seems like the key takeaway here is that information isn't this neutral thing.
Exactly.
It's this dynamic force that's shaping our realities, our societies, our future.
Yeah.
And that power is only getting amplified by the growing influence of non-human intelligence.
Precisely. We need to move beyond this simplistic view that more information automatically equals better outcomes.
Right.
And really critically analyze how these information networks operate, who controls them, and what kinds of realities they're constructing.
Wow. This has been a really, really enlightening discussion. Thank you so much for sharing these insights.
It's been my pleasure.
And to you, our listener, we really urge you to think of the implications of information in this new light.
Yeah.
Don't just passively consume. Think critically about the sources you're getting your information from.
Yeah.
The narratives that are being presented, and the potential impact on your understanding and on the world around you.
This brings up a really crucial question for you to consider. If information's primary function is connection and creation, rather than just representing the truth, how does that change how you evaluate the information you encounter every day?
That's something to really think about.
It is.
For more dives into the forces shaping our world, be sure to subscribe, share this exploration with others who, value understanding these complex issues.
Wow.
And if you want to delve even deeper into these ideas, we highly recommend Yuval Noah Harari's book, NEXUS. There's a link to purchase it in the show notes. Most importantly, stay curious and keep thinking critically.
Keep questioning.
Yeah.
Everything.